Welcome to Lead Live, a conversation for ministry leaders by ministry leaders. I'm Josh Franks.
And I'm Clint Berry, and we're the co-founders of the LEAD program. Today on the show, we're joined by Dr. Mark Byrom to talk about the future of international missions trips. Hey, welcome in, leaders, to another edition of Lead Live. My name's Clint Berry, and this is Josh Franks. We are going to have a great show today, Josh. So why don't you get us up to speed on the topic of today's Lead Live?
Well, we are talking about short-term missions trips. So short-term mission trips, those beautiful things that have great potential to stir in people's hearts, kind of a greater appreciation, maybe a greater embrace for God's heart for the world, and has the potential to create partnerships, long-lasting investment in reaching people who have not yet been reached with the good news of Jesus Christ yet.
That's good. Yeah, and it also has just the ability to give people a bigger view of who God is and their place in the world. So we're excited to have this conversation with our friend Mark. I got to meet Mark almost 9-10 months ago as we were in Europe together doing some training. And it's just a real joy to hang out with Mark. So with that, let's welcome Mark Byrom to Lead Live. Mark.
Here he comes.
There we go. Brad had to push him in the door. Hey, Mark, it's good to see you, dude. Man, it's been a minute since you and I got to be in Kandern, Germany together, but it was such a beautiful place to be. And you and I got to share some meals together, and to hear your heart about short-term missions was pretty impressive. Could you just take a minute and explain your role in ministry, where you do ministry in your local church context, and a little bit about your family? If you could do that for us, it'd be great.
It's great to be with you guys, and I'm up here in Appleton, Wisconsin, up in Packerland for you guys in Ohio, and I'm serving at a Big Alliance church in Appleton as their Global Connections pastor. So my role here really is about mobilizing this church to engage globally in some big ways. We have a number of partnerships on multiple continents, and we have a good number of missionary families that we support that are sent out from our church. And so really it's about coming alongside each of our families that are serving and connecting with these partnerships to make a really significant impact. And part of that is to get the whole church engaged. And so a big piece of that is sending short-term teams. And we've pretty much over the last number of years, I've been on staff here about 7 years, we've been really developing good preparations and sending teams strategically with these partnerships, not just to send a team, but because it really is fitting into the bigger picture of what's going on. And we've been able to mobilize in some new ways that some of the results I'm seeing out of this are strengthening partnerships that mean we're helping a bigger picture of what's going on in that location, more than just us and them, but that together or do something significant. And also we're seeing people catch the vision. And even just this year, we got 2 new families that are getting ready to be sent. We sent a family last year with Kama. And this year we're going to have a family going down to Envision Atlanta. And we're going to be having another family go to Europe to serve. About my family, got 3 girls that are all at a high school. Our youngest just graduated this spring. What a bummer. Wow. But she's doing great. But our oldest just graduated from Nyack, and our second daughter's in her senior year out in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, at University of Wisconsin. And then my wife, she's a teacher, but I mean, we served in ministry some 20 years together, but she teaches music locally here. And yeah, good to be here with all you guys, and love doing a connect like this.
Yeah, it's really great to have you, Mark. To kind of get us into the topic for the day, you and your wife did serve overseas for many years. And I would just love to know kind of your perspective on short-term trips. Obviously, COVID-19 robbed so many different trips, and so many had to be canceled. But if you could just kind of shoot from the hip and just kind of say, yeah, I think international missions trips are going to shift its focus in X, Y, or Z way. Like, what do you see coming down the pipeline for international trips going forward from your perspective, having run so many, received so many trips yourself? What's going to shift within missions trips going forward?
Well, I think a lot of people are just trying to figure out when and how are we going to get the next team. And that in itself, just that statement right there, when and how, really is going to, I think, push a lot of churches to being more strategic in how you send a team. In fact, I think initial teams that are going to be going out are probably going to be smaller than bigger, just because there's a lot of question marks, and it's a lot easier to handle sending a shorter team and a smaller team, but and probably not as long too. We're just going to be kind of dipping our feet back in the water, seeing what it looks like. But where we send a team, I really believe is going to be much more tagged to the strategy of partnership and where are we connected long term. And I would even tell anybody that's connected to a church, if you haven't developed a long-term partnership that ultimately means short-term teams, you're really missing out. I know when we were in Bosnia and Herzegovina, former Yugoslavia over in Central Europe, our team really got to the point where we would not receive a short-term team from a church unless they had a longer-term partnership with us. There was just such greater effectiveness, ability to work together, a bigger picture on their part of what they were partnering in, a stronger connection, not to just one missionary family from that country, but multiple people that could come do a swing through, let's say, during a conference week, make a connect. It's not tagged to just one family. Like we left the field a number of years back, but I know of partnering churches that are still receiving people that serve in Bosnia because of the connection that they have. I just could keep going on and on. I mean, giving increases towards missions when you have a personal connect to it, that's so significant. And then when you get the boots on the ground, people actually traveling there, not only do you get to see what you're a part of, but you see the long-term results of it. And that builds on, the results of what comes out of a short-term team on the ground.
That's good. If you're just joining us on Lead Live today, we're talking to Mark Byrom, and we're chatting about the future of short-term trips. We would love for you to engage with us as leaders. So if you have questions for Mark, we would love for you to engage with us there, and you can just kind of throw those comments or questions at us via Periscope, YouTube, or Facebook. That's going to be outstanding if you guys want to engage with us and Mark today. Mark, you were talking about partnerships. So can you give us some key markers or identifiers? What should so Josh and I, pastors here in the States, what should I be looking at in terms of trying to find a good collaboration, a good partnership with an overseas? So from the church, let's say the Western American church side, what would be some of the indicators that would be a great partnership? What are some of those overarching partnership indicators for us?
I mean, the centerpiece of what partnership is relationship.
Yeah.
And what I mean by relationship is that it's not just one way. You really do have a connection with a church, with a ministry, with a team of missionaries that want to be in touch with you and are going to be in touch with you. And that in itself leads maybe to a few things that I would suggest if you're looking for partnership. One, maybe just find out in your region, like other churches or in your district, do they have some partnerships already going? And the reason I say that is because you might potentially be able to connect to some other churches that have a connection there that you could collaborate on and join in together and be able to make a connection where if you initially you're not able to send out a full short-term team, you might be able to have a few people jump in on that team that goes where there's a partnership. You know that you're going to have people from that region, where you're hoping to partner coming through your area that are going to be doing that on a regular basis. That makes a lot of sense. It's also an opportunity for you to collaborate project-wise with other churches, because sometimes, one example would be we got a partnership in Burkina Faso, and we have this chunk of money that we're able to put into a project. Right now, there's an amazing number of internally displaced people in Burkina Faso. And we have a connection with the church there, but we see the larger issue. And if you have some connections with some other churches that partner in the same way, I'm looking for some other people that are going to jump in on that and maybe be able to help out in a larger kind of way. So relationship is centerpiece. But I mean, another thing you're going to be asking is, how are we wired? Like, where are we as a church, in church life? Are we just starting out? Are we a church plant? Are we an established church? Those kinds of things might determine a little bit of where you'd want to partner, just because of where the ministry phase of that partnership could be. Is it with a field where they're just breaking ground on establishing a Christ presence in that country? Is the church just burgeoning, just starting out? That might be something you're really have some affinity to as a church. Maybe you're in the middle of church planning yourself, and that could be a contagious thing that you'd want to be a part of. And praise God, if you're planning churches, I will tell you this: if you're partnering well, you're probably going to find churches overseas that are planning churches. We're doing our first church plant up here in Appleton this fall. Crazy time to do a church plant, but I love it because where we partner, they've been planning churches left and right. Man, talk about a prayer base to you, talk about the two-way relationship. I'm trying to keep them updated on what we're doing so they can lift us up in prayer and be maybe giving us some tips from their perspective. Okay. And another thing you might look at is just flat out, does your church have some relationships with some specific missionaries, people that either were sent up by your church or they're from your region that you know them? It just makes sense to connect with them because of relationship. Yeah, back to that relationship side of things. So, I mean, those are a few things. There's a lot to talk about downside of partnership.
That's great. So I love that you talk about in the midst of COVID and travel restrictions and some of changing the game when it comes to maybe what churches or teams were planning this coming year. You said it's an opportunity for churches to be more strategic in their partnerships. So you talked about some of the strategy of partnership, but what are some of the things that churches can do intentionally during this time where maybe they can't send a team to continue building that partnership?
That's a great question, Josh. In fact, we're kind of stuck with that situation ourselves because I was mentioning Burkina Faso, and we started a partnership in a country where actually all of our alliance workers are not on the ground anymore there because of security issues. And COVID, that's a minor issue. They have an insurgency going on, but we've actually increased our connection with them over the last several years just because of this very small world that we live in that has things like Zoom or WhatsApp or other kind of mechanisms that allow us to be in touch. I use Google Translator, and actually you can communicate back and forth at a pretty amazing level with somebody that speaks a different language. There are opportunities also to be in touch with mission leadership over that region that gives you a lot of insight into what's going on. As we partnered in Africa, I've gotten to know who's the regional couple, both for access workers with the Alliance, also for CAMA, the relief branch of things. You start to get to meet some of the local leadership that a lot of times people that are locals in a country, they may know English also because they're doing so much international when it comes to humanitarian or other kind of mechanisms. So I'm just telling you this, every other month I'm doing an hour and a half interaction over a video call with leadership in Africa. And we're communicating better with more awareness, sending videos back and forth, doing all kinds of things that have just opened up doors for lay leaders in my church to connect into what's going on. And I'm only talking about one partnership out of 5 different partnerships that we have. And so it really kind of depends on what area of the world you're talking about. But I kind of navigate the waters of all the different mechanisms that there are for connecting and just really try to find what's the most ideal way to do that. We even have people come over this way. Maybe like right now, we're getting as creative as saying, okay, I can't send a team to Burkina Faso. So we're going to collaborate and even in partnership with a few other churches, we're bringing a number of their leadership over here. We're going to do a short-term team trip together. But you know where we're going to go? We're going to go to Atlanta. And these guys that speak French are going to do some amazing work alongside our Envision Atlanta crew among African or from other parts of the world, French-speaking immigrants and refugees. And then we were going to bring them up here for our mission conference week. And so getting creative with it, but there's some really cool ways you can do partnering when there's some things that aren't normal. And in COVID today, communication is the centerpiece for us to be aware of the challenges that they're having and for them to know what's going on here. You know, we've kind of upped our game on prayer to a whole different level. And COVID's been a catalyst for that, trying to figure out what to do with that.
That's outstanding.
That's really cool.
That's fun.
I pastor a church that has historically been very strong and supportive in its missions giving, but hasn't had any direct partnerships, at least over the last several years, maybe decades. And so this spring, maybe even last fall, I think we started the process of prayerfully considering a partnership and walking through some of those things. And so we haven't been deterred by any of those plans or that relationship building. And so, Mark, I appreciate those things. And I would encourage anyone listening or watching, it's easy in moments of crisis to kind of just put your head down and just focus on your stuff. But this is a great opportunity for you to really consider what God is doing all around the world and take some next steps in partnering with a missionary or international worker somewhere.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. So, Mark, let's talk about the other side of the relationship. So we were talking about the kind of the American side, that at least in our context, right? The American churches. But pre-show, we were talking about like the global majority church. I probably just butchered that, but we were talking more about that, and we were talking more about like you and the team in Bosnia. You said you had. We had to have a partnership for them to be able to send teams to us. So we do have students, graduates of the LEAD program that are serving internationally. And so they're going to have to, and of course their team will help them, but they're going to have to evaluate, from either other LEAD students saying, man, can I bring a team over because you were in my cohort or something like that? And how can they help, and what helps them evaluate, should we be involved in just one team after another? Because very rarely in my church experience have I ever had somebody over and I said, oh man, what are we going to do? Oh, now I gotta dream up a VBS, or I gotta dream up a sports thing, or I gotta dream up something for us to do. When friends come over to visit, they want to, they've never come to my house and said, man, we're going to do some ministry with you, right? Like I've never had that happen. But that's usually what we do on the other side. So what's the evaluation process? I think it's probably going to be very similar, but what's the evaluative process on the receiving side? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically you're asking us to put ourselves in their shoes, how they would be looking at what's worthwhile.
Yeah.
For partnership wise, even ultimately.
Yeah.
What not to do as a short-term missions team, right? That's
to say no to.
Yeah. A huge part of it is just flat out realizing you don't just approach them like, we got a team and we got to have a team this month in this kind of way. I mean, the reality is from the other side with the team that's serving cross-culturally, they got to figure out what in the world would you even do with the short-term team. Let me just put it this way. I think a lot of times we think we're doing insanely amazing things as we hit the ground in a short-term team. A lot of times we have an attitude like we're changing the world. And I think we got to do a reality check here, because who's long-term on the ground? It's the national church there, along with a potential group of alliance workers or whichever organization it might be. You're working to establish the church, and this again comes back to the whole reality on why in the world it's important to have the long-term relationship. Because when you're working with when you're the national church and you're working with a partner, when you're really asking for a team, because you really need a team, it's because you got something that you anticipate plugging them into, or that's going to benefit things in some kind of fashion or strengthen the relationship. And on our end, we just flat out have to have deep enough of a relationship that we have a good sense of what that looks like. Too often we assume things, or we approach things only from our schedule. We're not flexible. We think that we have the corner on how things are supposed to look. And we just have to have a sincere spirit of humility. In fact, when we would be on the ground in Bosnia, we were looking for partnering churches that just have an attitude of, we're here to serve. We want to partner in a way that is going to really impact and allow you to expand your ministry and develop it. You might have a team come and be a part of something, but it'd be ultimately maybe part of a much larger project that's over a longer period of time, that might establish a stronger relationship for the missionary to the national church leadership, and empower that and strengthen that. From the perspective of a national church pastor, it's challenging because the priorities may be quite different from what we think is important. There might be struggles that we really don't understand, and we got to build relationship over a longer period of time so we can interact and figure out what in the world a team is actually going to do that really helps out. A lot of times we make assumptions, and the best way to get around assumptions is to just be able to be in it long term, where you're really getting updates and you're able to interact well. I would tell you from my angle, I'm always, as I partner with a national church, with national leadership, I'm always leaning into the missionaries on the ground, because they got insights that I'm not going to pick up on. So if you're partnering in a place where there's not, if you would call it, Western boots on the ground, you're going to need to take even extra time to partner well and to figure out what it's supposed to look like. And I'm not talking Asia and Africa are really different than North America. You might be jumping into a partnership in, let's say, Europe, but I will tell you this: don't make any major assumptions. We're partnering in France, and I'm learning a crazy amount of things that I need to really take into account, of patience, how long things take place, what is leadership development on the ground like there, how in the world do they go about church planning, and not come in with an attitude of, well, this is how you're supposed to do it because we got the corner on it. So a spirit of humility is so huge. And if you have avenues where you're able to come in with a spirit to really learn from your partner, that says so much to them. That builds so much in just learning to trust each other, learning to ask hard questions together, learning how to be real about your struggles. A lot of times we just feel like we got to put our best foot forward. Authenticity is so huge. And all these things take place over time. And Josh, I'm only assuming as you guys have started to connect in, you're starting to see some of those things happen as you've been able to partner. And
so Mark, do you have any stories? You have any stories about where that has happened unsuccessfully or success? Like what does that practically look like? But you have a spirit of humility and don't make assumptions and the attitude of a learner. Have you ever been on a trip where, without naming names or giving a very, very good description of that person, anything that would help us understand that was unsuccessful, and maybe this is a more successful way to do that? Or Clint, you have any in the trips that you've been on?
I mean, coming from North America, money is always an issue when you're interacting in partnership, because there's the assumption that North American church has a lot of money to throw into a project. or to be backing up certain things. And I flat out tell anybody that's working on doing short-term trips or partnering at a high level to read books like When Helping Hurts, so you understand that empowering a partnership, another church in another country, a church planting ministry, is not just throwing money at it. It has to be about relationship. And I've seen some situations where you come in and you potentially offer up a big chunk of money, and just because you give a big chunk of money and even have it set aside, maybe you're saying you're going to do really well because we're not going to just throw the money at them right away, but they know the money's there. It can end up in the long term being something that keeps the national church from creating something that's within their own means. That's the number one thing. It can keep them from being able to have ownership in it. And it can also keep them from realizing how this should look within their own context. Because I find a lot of times when it's tagged to U.S. money, they feel like it needs to be up to a certain standard in the U.S. context, which in many cases is so far off, it's not even funny. I will contrast. I will give you an example of what I would say was an incredibly strong success story of doing this well, where
great. I'm
going back to Burkina, where we had a connection with a significant church in the capital city. And there was a kind of a long history about a project around kind of a ministry center that the church was trying to establish, where one way or another, I don't know all the inner workings, but money was thrown around, and I think it got as far as a foundation, and things were quite challenging. No pointing fingers between mission churches in the U.S., the national church, but it didn't happen. And I would tell you, in interacting with the church leadership from that specific influential church, we really came alongside them where we had a piece of it, but really they took the major portion of it, and we really limited how much we were able to put into this. And it was almost painful at times because I know it's a very poor country, but they stepped up and they made ownership in this at a much higher level. And I see real strong health behind that because we limited ourselves, but we also had a deep relationship and awareness of what was going on through the whole timing of this project. I remember on my trip out there just a couple of years back, it was so cool. The one Sunday we were there visiting, that was the same Sunday that above and beyond the regular offering they had going on, they had envelopes. Everybody in that whole church was bringing up their white envelope that was specifically about that project. And they have completed that first level in that building project. It's in use now, where you got a church of many, many, many hundreds that had been living with just 2 classrooms to serve their young people and all these ministries. And now that's been multiplied many times more. And it's just so fun to see them owning it, utilizing it. And we got a piece of it, We could have given more, but the truth is, in the midst of that, they're empowered with a much higher level of ownership. Yeah. And it's been a lot of fun down that line.
That's cool.
Money can be a really challenging thing, and we got to just be really careful and wise about how we go about it.
I think, Mark, while you're speaking, I think something that's come to mind for me in the trips that I've been on, and I've got to travel fairly extensively. It's like expectations, and so you plan and prep, and sometimes there's not as many meetings with the boots on the ground as there should be. And I would suggest to our leaders, like, overdo it when it comes to the communication, the email, the WhatsApp, the Zoom call. Just overdo it and really announce the expectations over and over and over again, and right size those expectations. Like, be realistic in what you're going to be able to accomplish. Pick 1 or 2 goals and really go after that. But I've been on a couple of trips where I get down there and there was supposed to be this schedule, and I understand, like, the schedule gets ruined, like, no problem. But as I'm like laying in my bunk, like watching another episode of something on Netflix, I'm going, I didn't travel here to do this. Like, I traveled here to engage with people. I didn't travel here to engage with my bunk bed and Netflix, and so I think that is like really important for us as ministry leaders to just try to set those expectations. Like, what happens if the schedule gets blown apart? Where can we pivot? Is there something else that our team could do if a project falls through? And that's going to really like open up a day or 2 days now in the schedule. Is there something else that's going to plug in there that we can do? Because what I don't want is for people to go, well, I had a nice vacation to sunny wherever, and have them really kind of limping from that point forward, going, man, was that really worth it? So trying to have some contingencies, but also right expectations is what really comes to my mind for short-term trips.
Clint, I would tell you, one of our best teams that we ever had during our time was a team that was supposed to be in Macedonia, down in southern Yugoslavia. And because there was an accident at the work site there, they weren't able to do that project. So they hopped in a car and drove all the way up to Bosnia to serve in our city. So it was it wasn't even in the same location. These guys had such huge servant hearts, and they got so much done because we were on the fly just trying to figure out how to help out and work with them and come into what's going on. And the servant heart, their expectations were, we are here to do whatever is needed. And if it means twiddling our thumbs, we'll twiddle our thumbs. If it means that we're jumping into something that was totally out of our box, unexpected, we're going to do it. And that was amazing. It was a wonderful team.
Yeah, that's cool. And what I appreciate about that is the receptivity of the team there, in the city saying, yeah, come on and join us. We get it. But then also the creativity of, those who are in Macedonia, boots on the ground, and then the team leaders to say, okay, let's not sit around, like let's get after something, and to be able to pivot in that moment and go and execute on something. The adaptability has got to be really high for your team and team leadership. But just the creativity and probably some of the pre-thinking, like if something falls apart, we have some options. And I think that's goes into making great trips for our people, because the last thing we want to do really is to make it feel like we just took a really expensive vacation, right? And we visited some churches or something like that. We really would like to feel like we've contributed. And I think all want to make sure that we're contributing in a right way, in a healthy way. Like Mark, like what is the impact? What do you think is the impact of a missions trip when you have a long-term, committed partnership, relationally oriented, Christ-centered? Like what's the impact of something like that over time?
I think it's North American. We're probably thinking, well, I got this done and I got that done and I did all these things, and I would actually tell you, no, it really is hearts that come back having had the cross-cultural experience, where if they've been trained well, they're aware of the relationship, they get to experience the relationship face-to-face, on-site, with insight. They're going to be coming back and have a whole different level of engagement, awareness in prayer, awareness in giving. But even more than that, I think when short-term missions is done well in partnership, that people look around and they've had the box of, what our normal box of how we live life, that the sides of that box knocked out, that allow them to ask a lot of them missional kind of questions that, you see the missionaries in conjunction with local believers in that country asking, how can we make Christ's name known? And ultimately can empower people to live that out here. And that means good follow-up on a short-term team. It's empowered by a greater awareness of a long-term partner, because it's not something that it's not the flavor of the year for the short-term trip for wherever. It's a long-term thing. And I've seen it many times over that it also results in people that consider going. I would tell you over the last several years, as we've had more short-term teams going in the midst of a strong partnership, and good follow-up, we've seen many more people realizing and understanding a call to go. And those that are not called to go have a much more realization of the call to send and back up those that are being sent, and awareness of the churches that we partner with. We're partnering with some churches that have some amazing leaders. And people, when they get a chance to hear these guys, they might visit us or get a chance to be over there, really inspired by the level of vision, the passion, what they're doing at the highest levels. And I think a lot of people that have had those kinds of connections in our church would be able to rattle off, what is the vision of our church in Peru? And, it's about changed lives, restoring families, and empowering that to happen both locally in Lima and beyond, where they have a huge church planting vision. When we're in Burkina, you rub shoulders there and you realize they have a heart to empower education and impacting young people in a huge, huge level, where they're starting schools and they're raising up the next generation of new pastors. And on top of that, these guys have this massive heart for church planting. And you got a piece of it. You got a piece of it when it's been done well. I'm sure you can't pick up that I'm big on partnership, but
So my question is then, what does a typical church, what does a healthy rhythm for partnership look like? How many times should a church send a team? Is that yearly, every other year? What are the other things? Communication, updates. You talked about bringing a team from the partnership field. Like what in your mind does a healthy rhythm of partnership look like?
I think if it's France, it should be at least monthly with spouse, all travel included. That's what I would propose, Mark. I don't know if that's good or not, but that's what I would propose to someplace like there, or warm in the wintertime. And that's what I would suggest.
Well, actually, my wife and I are planning to swing through France every summer. Gave the secret away. In today's world, the way communication is, I think it should be pretty regular. And let me build a little bit around that, because I think if a church is partnering well, you need to have a lead pastor that's on board, that's passionate about it, along with basic church leadership, but also get where you got some solid lay leadership behind it, because for doing a partnership well, you can't just rely on one person that does everything. And as you get some lay leadership involved, they can be a part of communicating regularly and including the lead pastor or other key leaders on a regular basis, and come up with kind of a rhythm that works with your partner. Like they're pretty busy down in Peru or Burkina or France or some of the places we partner. So you got to schedule ahead of time. You got to figure out what it's going to look like. You got to realize time differences and what are the mechanisms that really work. WhatsApp changed everything for Africa, because for a while there, the internet was so terrible, it was not going, but things have been getting better that way. So we try to partner and communicate in a way that's at least bi-monthly, if not monthly, if possible. Sometimes it's just flat out zapping some emails back and forth with some prayer requests, so you can include that kind of information. When you're asking about like how often somebody heads over to the other location, or if maybe possibly work out a way to get some of their leadership over your way, or mission tour, when it's every 4 years you would get one of our workers back. But if you partner with the whole team, you might get people more regular than that, because there's a rotation with the larger team according to what field you're working with. And you might, like, I know who's going to be back well ahead of a year, and I got my name in for our church to have them coming through. One of our key workers that serves in Senegal, he's coming through next month, and I was talking to him well over a year ago. You want to be on top of that. But if you're trying to bring in some nationals, that's not inexpensive. It's an expensive thing, but that's where you key in with some other potential partners that are part of this, and you may share that and most people, when they're coming back, they probably can't be here 3 weeks, but at least they might be able to be around 2 to 3 different Sundays where you could share that between you and another church or two and collaborate. I'm just giving you some thoughts, because part of it's just all practicalities. Is it going to work out or not? One of our partners, that lead pastor, has been up here just about every year, because one way or another he figures out how to get up here. He has his partnerships, and we're one of the main ones, and it works out really nice. But every once in a while he wants to bring a few other people, and that's more expensive. It can't happen as often. For short-term teams, I mean, some churches might be 1 or 2 a year. Other churches, it might be more than that. With some churches, it might be every other year. I mean, it just kind of depends on what your resources are, who's involved, and how often they could actually even do the trip, and there might be times you send a real small team. Let's say your lead pastor and another 1 or 2 people that just come through and do some training and are trying to figure things out, trying to cultivate that relationship. So
that's good. Yeah. I think when I was pastoring a church here in Ohio, we had 4 partners, and we wanted to, in cooperation with those partnerships, we wanted to send a team to one of those locations every year. So for us, we would be sending one team like pretty much every summer, but it would be a rotation. So like every 4th year, we would finally get back to whatever location geography we were going to in the world. And so it wasn't that was the most intensive, but then also trying to, like, once a quarter, basically, we would highlight those missionaries, try to have a video from them, regular communication. We put them, just something simple, we put them on our regular prayer stuff. So as we were, sending out information about what the church was doing, and we usually sent that email weekly, and we would include those. We wanted all of our partners to receive information about the body life of what's going on. And then we said, could we receive anything that you guys feel, cool with sharing with us, like not only your prayer letter, but just more like life stuff. So if they were planting a church, I was like, man, send us your information. Like, well, it's going to be in another language. I'm like, we'll use Google Translator on our side, and, we'll figure it out. But to be able to have that 2-way in the normal stuff is really useful in order to build that bridge of relationship that's going to be really stout over the course of time. So think about my suggestion would be think about regular stuff that you're already doing, so you don't have to reinvent that wheel. Yeah.
That's great.
I love what you're saying on the patterns, because we got a lot going on the ground, and they do too. And if you got a regular pattern, it just helps everybody out.
It's great. If you're just joining us, we are talking with Mark Byrom about international short-term trips, not just international, but all short-term trips, and the future of them. If you have a question or comment for Mark, please go ahead and put that in the comment section. I appreciate what Jason Swartz has said. He says, I've loved seeing people from the fringe of my church go and come back with deep friendships, commitment to serve the church as they return, an open heart to knowing there is more to living for Christ in their community. So that raises an interesting question. What are the qualifications for someone to go on a short-term trip? Who do you take and who don't you take?
Wow, that's a good one. With our church, we have an application process because we want some control over that, because it's not a free-for-all. And it kind of is determined by what kind of trip and where it's going, because some trips you want to have a certain level of maturity. You might have some skill sets, different kinds of things that go along with that specific trip. But there are a few different styles of short-term trips that we have that are even open to somebody that may not be a believer yet, because the context of that trip, if they have a heart to serve and they're willing to live by, the guidelines and the values of what you've set up for your trip and go through the training, more power to you. If anything, I think they're going to be impacted with the reality of serving and being around a bunch of believers and seeing what God's doing, we've seen some people come to Christ that way. But, underlying short-term trips, the purpose of short-term trips is not a conversion of team members. Typically, that's kind of bonus above everything else. It's about putting together a team that's really going to hold the value of the larger picture, why you do short-term trips and why you're in partnership, and people that can be a part of that in a way that is going to cultivate that, is not going to take away from that. So, in some ways, to say that you're going to be choosing the right team and the right people to go on the trip, you really have to have the right leader. In fact, leadership, I would tell you, leadership is the key part of having successful short-term trips, where they're involved with the training, where they're involved with, in a sense, a mechanism of discipleship for empowering people to have a servant's heart, to allow Romans 12, 1 and 2 to be realized in a person's life in new kinds of ways, for then also doing good follow-up with the short-term team when they get back to be able to apply what they've done. And just some research I've done and things that I've seen in my years is really it can make or break a team by what kind of leadership you have in place. And when leadership's really involved with picking out and bringing together the right kind of team, you're looking at just how people interact with each other, the chemistry of a team, and some other kinds of key factors, and can be ultimately work in conjunction with the leadership of a church to be sure your church is represented well. How you send a team that's going is not just doing this for themselves, but they're doing it because of representing who you are and being a part of a relationship that is bigger than any one person on a team. Those are just a few thoughts. There's some great resources out there for prepping teams, for helping a team to figure out how to prepare well, things that a leader should be thinking about. And again, coming back to partnership, when you're partnering well and you got a long-term relationship with a team, like an alliance team of missionaries on the ground, they give you a lot of resource to do that well, to be sure the right people go. And in our case, you got people that have been there already that can help to train that team, that have been a part of things that help from an insider's perspective, the next team to prepare well as they're getting ready to go. Just a few insights.
No, that's good. Mark, maybe just a little bit of a follow-up. You mentioned that there's lots of great resources. Could you just share maybe 2 equipping resources to get a team ready to go? And what will happen is our guy will drop, if he can find it online, he'll drop a link in the comments for everyone to see and in the show notes. Is there any resource that comes to mind that you would say, man, yeah, this is great for prepping a team to go?
Envision has a great online book called Reimagining Short-Term Missions that really lays out a lot of these concepts. Just to give you the top 4 things that they talk through is how we see missions in the global church. We've already kind of talked about that. That's a part of that book. How we see ourselves, in other words, what kind of changes are going to happen inside a person as they're getting ready to go. How we see others, that whole perspective of the majority world church, and that we realize this is a lot bigger than just our way of doing things. You really get a sense of what that's about by reading through this resource. And then how we see our trips, how do we define the whole purpose behind the trip, and how does it fit into the larger picture of what God's doing? That's a resource out of Envision that is excellent. And they got some videos that go along with that too that might be really helpful for doing some training. Another online resource is SOE.com. I don't know how that acronym goes along. It's really, if you Google short-term missions with excellence, it's an online resource for just doing short-term teams well. And they have 7 guidelines for doing missions with excellence that they unpack that might give you a chance to kind of see what that looks like. Some other things are, just getting a good resource such as I'm not sure if your church is connected to Missio Nexus. It's an organization out there that not only empowers short-term mission agencies out of North America, but it also is about empowering globally minded churches out of North America. And they got some great resources to help out short-term teams and think about partnerships and some other kinds of things. They have regular webinars. Actually, in the last 3 or 4 months, I've listened to 2 or 3 or 4 different webinars that Missio Nexus had that are great for pastors or church mission leaders that are just thinking about what in the world is it supposed to look like now in the midst of COVID-19? How's it going to come out on the other end? But for doing preparation for short-term missions, I would encourage you maybe to just go on Amazon and just plug in short-term missions preparation, and there's just a bunch of different books, and maybe pick up 2, 3, 4 different books and kind of pick and choose what looks good for you. That's actually what our church did, because most of them had some things that we liked and some things we didn't like, and we ended up just creating our own preparation manual for our church. And if anybody wanted to, I would tell you, you could share my email and have somebody zap me a note, and I'll send you the PDF version of our manual. We have both one for a team member and then one for a team leader, and just what our church put together.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, I would ask maybe you could chat about if it would be cool for us to maybe put a link on a website to send it to that PDF, or maybe we could upload it to leadcma.org and people could download that resource as a part of the stuff. And a big shout out to Appleton Alliance for that. I think Leader Treks comes to mind. I've prepped students with Leader Treks before. It's like pre-stuff, and then during the trip, it'll lay out like, are you going for a 6-day or an 8-day or a 10-day trip? And they've got some devotional thoughts and really encouraging stuff to those. And then for fundraising money, the cash and the fundraising to go along with it, we've explored managedmissions.com. Okay, so all right, we're on to something there. So Managed Missions is one of the, great organization, but they know how to raise money for missions trips, and they're giving you the tools to do it. Like, so, receiving payments, goals, and budgeting, communication, meetings, all of those things are really easy at managedmissions.com. Outstanding stuff from them and how to fundraise money. So we have one last comment, and we're to the top of our time, which will be, let me get these up in front of me. I just lost it. Went someplace. There we go. So Jason adds, I think this is a cool comment and a question. We've started some virtual mission trip experiences in this season. Do you guys have any experience with this? Any thoughts or suggestions to keep people engaged through a time of no travel, both in the U.S. church and abroad? Have you guys explored these virtual mission trip experiences or online experiences? And Mark, what have you heard about them? And if you tried to do one, what does that mean? What does that even look like during this season?
We haven't actually done one ourselves. I've been hearing about this. If you go to that website for short-term missions with excellence, I was just kind of looking at this stuff, and I was like, man, they got about probably 10 different organizations that have a kind of a virtual short-term experience that you. What I'm picking up, there's a way that they have put together videos and some other kinds of things where we bring a group of people together and get a chance to look and see, kind of get a tour virtually, connect with some of the people. Most of these are with different kinds of mission agencies. I haven't heard of one that the Alliance has actually put together itself with the Christian Missionary Alliance. But one thing you might be able to do, and I wouldn't necessarily call this a virtual short-term mission experience, but I've been doing kind of a monthly webinar for just an hour over Zoom, where I've invited some of our missionaries, and they've been able to do screen shares, show a short video. At the very end of our time, we've broken into just the different groups that you can do through Zoom for prayer at the end of it. We record the thing so people can watch that webinar later if they didn't get a chance to catch it. And it's been great with all of our partners and a lot of our missionaries to be able to jump in on that interaction that in itself is a virtual connect to our person that we have a partnership with, that we can't get a team over there, but we can get some insight and include people that have a heart for that. So there's some very creative things that are going on. And if you research it a little bit, you might be able to jump into something like that.
I hear you describe that, it's like maybe what Airbnb started doing with kind of like, showcasing like their, homes all around the world. And so some of those Airbnb hosts were just saying, hey, check this out. You can hang out with us online, and here's the view and everything's like that. But only it's definitely a partnership building time, right? Where they can show you some of their environment and you can show them some of yours, which is kind of cool to think about. Guys, as we come to the end of this time together, I want to jump into some final thoughts as we think about the future of missions. Let's kind of like encapsulate our conversation and maybe throw down one last thing. So Josh, why don't you lead us off with a final thought of short-term trips in our time today?
Yeah, Mark, thanks for your time. I really appreciate your heart and passion and your insight into some of the strategies that churches and leaders can be embracing. I think I would say this, and that is in the middle of change, it's easy to become solely occupied with your own stuff and ministry, but we're meant to be people. God's built it into us to be extending his kingdom through all the Acts 1:8 environments to the ends of the world. And so don't neglect that wiring that God's put in you through the Holy Spirit during this time. Find creative ways to build relationships and partnerships with fields and international workers all over the world.
That's good. And Mark, final thoughts for you coming out of this conversation that we've explored lots of different topics, but sum it up for us, your heart for international trips.
I think maybe a lot of people are kind of down when, because most everybody's probably canceled any trips they had in 2020 with anticipation of hoping for 2021. But I would tell you this. We are standing in a day where there's so many possibilities for the future, and the possibilities to have teams going out, to have people impacted in your church, and to partner well. The Alliance is just opening up all kinds of possibilities and organizing itself in a way I think people are able to wrap their heads around as we have more definition between the different branches of Alliance mission, and in many ways more accessibility to those that are serving around the world. I think it bodes really well for what the future is. And if you're even looking as people do short-term trips with long-term in mind, even to send long-term, there are more ways to go out with the Alliance to serve long-term and at any age than ever before. And to me, I get really excited about that. And I'm actually realizing and seeing that with the people that are going out, you don't have to go the old traditional way. There's all kinds of new ways. A guy from our town's a car mechanic in Senegal right now. There's another guy that was doing medical work just last year that is on his way to Guinea, West Africa to do medical work. There's another family that's looking to serve at a community center in Pristina, Kosovo. So those are lay people, not somebody that went through ordination and everything. That's the amazing thing. So I get excited about this stuff. And I think there's a lot to plug into with Alliance missions, and short-term teams are a big part of that.
Absolutely. I think my final thought for today is, there's opportunities all about us, even in this age of COVID. We've said this over and over again on Lead Live, and we're imploring you as leaders. And Josh says this numerous times, it's an echo of Andy Stanley. But when things are regular and routine, that doesn't require a whole lot of leadership. When things are uncertain, now we have to lead. And this is the time for it. Even on Sunday, ministering in church and hearing, hearing some family issues that are going on. I said, listen, you don't want to go back. Like, you don't go back. Like, that's not where you want to be. And you know, it's who we're speaking to is like, yeah, I don't want to go back because that was crazy. But I said, you don't know what the future is yet. You're still walking into this unknown, but it's got to be better than there. And so what's better for international missions trips going forward? So there is, the whole world has had to stand on its own for the last several months and figure things out without trips coming and going. And so what does that mean? And what will the new begin? But embrace it. Don't in your head, I just want to get back to how it used to be. Well, there's some innovation and opportunity, even with trips, that will be new and greater, better than what we had early in 2009, early 2020. I went to France. Mark and I were both in France and Germany at the same time at the beginning of the pandemic. It was kind of crazy in China at that point. But now 8 months later, we're going, okay, there's got to be something new in the future. And I would implore all of us, lean into that new. Like, God has something really cool there for us. We don't need to go back. Some things weren't great then. Some things can get even better now, especially with this space for us to really become, your words, Mark, more strategic in our partnerships. Guys, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much, Mark, for your time. It's always a joy speaking to you, and thank you for bringing your wisdom to our conversation today for our leaders. And as always, leaders, we're here for you. We're loading new students into cohorts. The application is open at leadcma.org. We'd love to have you apply, and our team will be along with you for the journey. You can just go to leadcma.org/apply to find that application. Next week, we're back into church multiplication training in that series. And our friend Erica will be with us as we talk about internal culture within the organization. I can't wait for you guys to meet our friend Erica. She's dynamite, and will be a great interview next week as well. So, Josh, wrap us up. Send us out.
It's going to be great. Leaders, lead on.